will be about food. So maybe like food for thought. So we'll have food safety, the right way is the safe way, by Mr. Tarak Nath Chatterjee. He is MSc in Biochemistry, Management Diploma in Quality Assurance, HACCP lead editor in course in PAVQ, professional experience, manager in Quality Assurance at Skies Catering Private Limited. Manager one that is very interesting because manager food hygiene and quality control at Taj Bengal. Sometimes I used to take food in Taj Bengal also. So microbiologist, Yaksam Breweries Limited. So I think now I request Mr. Tarak Nath Chatterjee to come down and give.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. And before I start my presentation, I just want to thank MC Vellore for giving this wonderful opportunity to interact with you and share some of my experiences that I have gathered working in different food and beverage organizations for over last 16 years. And currently also I'm working for a leading food service company, a global leader, which is Compass Group, and I'm heading their quality division. So our topic is food safety. So first we need to know what is safe food is all about. Safe food is something like we should be free from any kind of contaminants. When I mean contaminants, I'll explain to that in subsequent slides what is exactly meant by contaminants, and will not cause any injury or illness upon consumption. And what is a food safety management system is? Food safety management system is nothing but the processes and the systems that we adopt to ensure that food is free from any contaminant. That is called the food safety management system. And like many other things, it is all initiated in the West because we have learned a lot from the West. And like many other things, in India, still we are lacking in this. But yes, the awareness level is developing. The food safety system originally was initiated with NASA in States way back in the year 1959, and the plan was to ensure safe food for their astronauts, because when they send the astronauts into space, and if anything happens to them, they cannot seek any medical advice or attention. And so for them, food safety was very, very important. So it's all started there, and they have introduced a system called HACCP, which is called a Hazard Analysis and Critical Control Point. And later on, it was adopted by, it was many other companies in the Western world, and who also have made it mandatory. And over the years, it has taken different shapes, different revisions has taken places in the guidelines. And in 2005, they've introduced a more refined version of HACCP called ISO 22000. And in India also, we have the Food Safety Act, which is a PFA, Prevention of Food Safety and Adulteration Act, which was again refined and has been reintroduced in the system as FSSAI, Food Safety and Standard Acts of India. In the year 2011, it started and enforced in 2012. But again, enforcement is not 100%, and there are many rooms for improvement. Now, what is a hazard? When we talk about a hazard in food, anything with the potential to cause harm is called a hazard. And if you see from food safety point of view, we categorize hazard in three main divisions, which is a microbiological hazard, and that can cause like food poisoning or foodborne illness. As we know that many deadly diseases can pass through food and even water, which one of my previous colleagues have already explained in water sanitation. And then the sources of this microbiological contaminations food is mainly from raw materials. Raw materials mean raw food materials, which we use to make food. And for your information, whatever I'm discussing today is not only applicable for hospitals, it is equally applicable for all of us in our daily life. So the sources like the same raw material which we purchase from our grocery shop or the vegetable market, and the cross-contamination, which is another very significant way of introducing microbes in the food, and then multiplication or release of toxins, and then survival of the spores. The second category of the contaminant is the chemical contamination. That also causes food poisoning or chronic illness. Now, how chemicals can come into the food is again like raw materials, like if there is uncontrolled use of pesticide during harvesting, then these chemicals can go into. If we use in the food preparation areas, if we use pesticides for controlling the pest, which is not approved chemicals, there are certain chemicals which is approved by WHO. If you don't use those chemicals, then and it goes in the food, then that also can cause disease or illness. Then cleaning agents, which we use to clean our, food preparation equipments and utensils. Pesticides, I already said, weed killers. Allergens. Now, allergens is something which is not, intentionally mixed with the food. As we all know that most of us, or many of us, I would say, can be allergic to one or more chemical constituent of food. And so this is something like we need to be aware of, and the communication has to be proper. Like most common allergens, you can say soy proteins, seafoods, nuts and its derivatives like groundnut oil, eggs and all that. And use of excessive additives in the food. We use additives in the food for different reasons. One reason could be stabilizers, so to increase the shelf life of the food. So these are all like chemical contaminants. Then the physical contaminant. Like physical contaminant can, like it is called like the foreign objects. We call it the foreign. What is a foreign object in food? Foreign objects are like the objects which is not a normal ingredient of the food. For example, if you get a stone in the food, that is called a foreign object, because stone is not a normal ingredient of food, right? And there are many instances where we come across foreign objects, like even glass piece or a piece of metal, which is extremely, extremely dangerous. And needless to say, if we consume those inadvertently, then it can cause damage to our internal organs as well, leading to death even. These are again present mostly in the raw materials, or sometimes it has been also observed during the processing line. It can also be introduced in the food. So these are the main three, type of contaminants which we can anticipate to enter in the food handling chain. And in all this HACCP or ISO 20000, the main objective is to do a detailed process flow analysis of the food chain, and then identify each step for the presence of or probability of occurrence of these contaminants, and then eliminate them either completely or to an acceptable level. We call those steps as CCP, the critical control points. So that is the main objective of the food safety management system. Now, what are some of the common symptoms of the food poisoning? Nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, fever, dehydration. And apart from that, there is one thing, like there can be some foodborne disease where the consumer becomes a latent carrier. We call a vector. Means that the person doesn't manifest the symptoms, but he or she can be a carrier of the disease. And from that person, the disease can be spread. So those people are even more dangerous. Some of the other people who are at risk is obviously the immunocompromised people, like the pregnant woman, young people with chronic illness or weakened immune system, people receiving special drug therapies which suppresses the immune response, and older adults. Now there are many microbes, of which maybe around 22 we call pathogens, like actually the disease-causing microbes. And these pathogens are also varies from countries to country. In India, I have listed some of the very common food poisoning or pathogens, which is called salmonella. Salmonella comes in the kitchen mainly through polluted meat or meat products, or maybe the water, or maybe the vegetables which grows near the soil. Then E. coli. E. coli again, it comes to the same like source where the sewage water somehow has contaminated the raw material. And of the E. coli, this particular strain 015787 is very, very deadly because it causes bloody diarrhea, which can even lead to death. Then Listeria monocytogens, Clostridium perfringens, Staph aureus, and noroviruses. These are some of the very common pathogens which we encounter. Now, to understand how to arrest the microbial contaminant in food, we need to understand a little bit of the microbial growth dynamics and the growth conditions. Now, to grow the microbes, they need certain conditions. We call it FATTOM: the food, acidity, time, temperature, oxygen, moisture. Food means the food we love, microbes also love the same kind of food. It is a high carb, high protein food, high carbohydrate, high protein food. Then acidity, they also love neutral acidity. Okay. Then time means they need some time to grow, to replicate. We call the doubling time. Okay. Then temperature, they need certain temperature, and the temperature is unfortunately like our most comfortable our body temperature, like around 37 degrees centigrade. Okay. So then oxygen, they need oxygen. Most of them, some are anaerobes or some are facultative anaerobes are there, but most of them need oxygen. And moisture, they need moisture. There is certain water activity they need. So for the same the example, like when the rice is dry, raw rice, it can stay for months, but once you cook it, it will be spoiled very soon. Why? Because there is certain kind of water that is being incorporated in the rice grains, and that helps the microbial growth. So now if you look on the left side, this is like microbial growth curve. Is plotted against the growth rate of the microbes against the temperature. If you see that initially when the temperature is around 0 degree, which is actually a junction of x and y axis somewhere, the growth is minimal. Now on increase of the temperature, the growth activity increases simply because the bacterial replication enzymes gets activated. And then the bacteria doubles at a faster rate, and around 37 degrees centigrade it reaches the peak, which is the peak of the curve. And then further increase the temperature, the replication decreases, and after around 63 degrees centigrade, which we all know it is like the pasteurization temperature, most of the pathogens dies, and if you further increase the temperature around 100 degrees centigrade, all microbes get killed except some spores, which survives, yes, even 100 degrees centigrade. For that, we need a different kind of technique, which is a pressure cooking, which we get even pressure cooker, and domestic pressure cooker. So if we see that curve, the maximum activity of bacterial growth happens at temperature range between 5 to 60 degrees centigrade, and we call it the temperature danger zone. So when talking about food safety and microbial contaminants, the one thing we should keep in mind is the food should spend minimum time in this danger zone. And that is why you should have hot food hot and cold food cold. Means hot food above 63 and cold food below 5 as much as possible. Now, these are some of the common sources of pathogens in hospitality or any, normal food catering industry, I would say. From soils and manures, untreated water, animals, and from ourself as well. Because our intestine, harbors lots of microbes. And how do the microbes get in the kitchen? Again, through raw materials, because we know the slaughterhouses from we get our, meat products in India are very unorganized. So how they slaughter the animal, how they process the meat, we don't know, and it all matters. Through those things, microbes can come into the food. Then the fruits and vegetables, which are grown on the soil or near the soil or inside the soil. Then the people who is like the food handlers, unwashed hands. Hand washing is very, very important. Very, very important. Most of the disease spreads through our hand. And there is a particular way how you should wash your hand. You have to use a kind of antimicrobial soap and not only a simple fragrant soap. In our SOP, you have in fact included a use of antimicrobial soap coupled with the gel, antimicrobial gel. And then the pests that is present in the kitchen kind of environment. Now, food safety, there's 4 basic rules. First is clean. You should keep your production line, means the food processing, receiving, processing and service areas, as clean as possible. Disinfect it with the proper disinfectant at periodic intervals, meaning maintaining a proper checklist. Then separate and segregate, means you have to segregate the food. Suppose you are using a same chiller for keeping a raw food or processed food and a cooked food. You should keep cooked food on top, semi-processed food in the middle, and raw food in the bottom. Why? Simply because if any dripping takes place from the raw food on the cooked food gets contaminated. Ideally, if you have a more number of chillers, then you should segregate, like one for dedicated for cooked, one for maybe semi-processed, and one for raw. Then cooking. Cooking is, in this kind of industry, cooking is the only way of killing the pathogens, and that also you need a particular temperature of cooking. 75 degrees centigrade is required, and then chill. So this I have already explained, like clean hands, clean food, clean surface, and cover food. Then the best possible way of avoiding cross-contamination is, one is segregation, other is a color-coded regime. You should use color-coded tools, color-coded chopping boards, color-coded knives, just to break this cycle of contamination. And this is the most globally accepted method. But you see on the right-hand side, sorry, my right-hand side and yours also maybe, this is a wrong practice. Things are not covered. Things are stored in a haphazard way. This can all lead to contamination. As I've already said, cooking needs 75 degrees centigrade and above. 75 is the core temperature. Means the surrounding temperature somehow would be around 95 degrees centigrade or more. Never reheat food more than once. Then chilling. Chilling protocol is like freezer, we need minus 18 degrees centigrade or lower, and refrigerator 0 to 5. And these are some of the temperature protocols for some of the foods. You can see if we keep a fresh poultry maybe 1 or 2 days in 5, but if you get a freezer, it says longer time, simply because even at the chiller temperature below 5, some multiplication takes place, but if you keep it at the freezing temperature, it stops totally, though the bacteria doesn't die. Please keep that. Bacteria only dies on heat treatment. Then some of the special advice for the immunocompromised patients, like soft cheeses to avoid, unprocessed milk to avoid because they're common source of listeria, And for all of us, raw meat, raw poultry means there are people take like steaks, which is raw, or semi-raw, which to be avoided, unpasteurized fruits and vegetables to avoid, because these are the sources of E. coli and Salmonella. There is a liquid diet section, which is very important because that food is not cooked there. So we should take the sanitation methods and use the gloves fallacy there as the only means of cutting down the cross-contamination. And there are certain major food groups which is very important from food safety point of view, and there are certain precautions like bread, and these are all high-carb food, which is to be served immediately after cooking, not to be spent a long time in the danger zone. Fruits and vegetables sanitized, egg, meat, and always store at proper temperature and cook at proper temperature. Milk and dairy products also is very, very important because they are having high protein diet.